The klaxon wailed through the tunnels of Blight Success mining complex, signaling the end of another 18-hour shift. Elias Rourke watched as his crew stumbled out of the elevator shafts, their faces coated in the metallic dust that would eventually kill them all. 300 years of servitude had reduced humanity to this: entertainment for the galaxy's so-called superior species. He checked his datapad, pretending to review production quotas while actually scanning the latest transmission from the Sealer Entertainment Networks. Another comedy special featuring humans performing their ancient monkey dances. Another round of laughter at humanity's expense. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. After all these years, he learned to hide the rage that simmered beneath the surface. The Sealer Dominion had conquered Earth with frightening ease. Their technology had been centuries ahead, their weapons capable of vaporizing entire continents. But they hadn't destroyed humanity. That would have been merciful. Instead, they'd found something far more valuable than another dead world. A species they could mock, humiliate, and exploit for their amusement. Shift change complete, Overseer Rourke reported Tam, one of the younger miners. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, already bearing the telltale signs of prolonged exposure to the heavy metals they extracted. His skin had taken on the grayish pallor that marked all long-term workers in the Voronezh system. Elias nodded, dismissing the crew with a wave. As they shuffled toward the habitation blocks, he caught fragments of conversation. They spoke of the latest humiliation broadcast across the galaxy, of friends and family forced to perform degrading acts for the entertainment of their overlords. Some laughed bitterly. Others remained silent, their spirits crushed beyond the point of reaction. He remembered a time when he'd worn a different uniform. The crisp blues of the Earth Defense Fleet, back when humanity still believed they could fight. Back when they thought their nuclear arsenals and orbital platforms meant something against civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel. The war had lasted exactly 17 days. Elias had been among the few survivors of the Battle of Luna, watching helplessly as the Sealers systematically dismantled Earth's defenses with weapons that defied human understanding. Now, 15 years later, he managed mining operations on a world so toxic that even the Sealer wouldn't set foot on its surface without full environmental suits. Humans, they discovered, had a remarkable tolerance for certain heavy metals. It made them perfect for extraction work on worlds like Blight 6, where automated systems failed within months due to the corrosive atmosphere. Elias made his way to the administrative sector, a series of reinforced tunnels that housed the colony's vital systems. His quarters were Spartan: a bed, a desk, and a small viewport that looked out onto the perpetual twilight of Blight Success surface. The planet's 3 suns never quite set, casting everything in shades of orange and red that reminded him of autumn on Earth. He pulled out a worn notebook from beneath his mattress, its pages filled with meticulous documentation. Every humiliation, every death, every violation of what the Sealer claimed were protected rights for client species. The notebook was one of dozens he'd filled over the years, all carefully hidden throughout the colony. Evidence, he told himself, for the day when someone, somewhere, would care about justice. The comm unit on his desk chirped, indicating an incoming transmission from the central hub on Voronezh Prime. He accepted the call, and the sneering face of Prefect Zoaxtar materialized in holographic form above his desk. The Sealer were humanoid in basic structure, but their elongated skulls, transparent blood vessels visible beneath translucent skin, and the third eye centered on their foreheads, marked them as decidedly alien. Overseer Rourke, the prefect's voice dripped with condescension. We have a special opportunity for your workers. The Galactic Council is hosting a cultural exhibition next month. We require a demonstration of your species' primitive customs. Elias kept his voice carefully neutral. What kind of demonstration, Prefect? Oh, nothing strenuous. Zoaxtar waved a 6-fingered hand dismissively. Perhaps that charming monkey dance your people performed during the Tertiary era? Our xenoanthropologists assure us it's quite authentic to your evolutionary heritage. The rage flared again, hot and immediate. Elias forced it down, maintaining his expression of servile attention. I'll need to check which workers are available, Prefect. Many are approaching their radiation limits for the month. Nonsense. Zodiac Star's third, I narrowed. Your species' resilience is well documented. Select 20 of your most entertaining workers. We'll need them for rehearsals starting next week. The transmission ended without waiting for a response. They never waited for responses. Humans weren't expected to have opinions worth hearing. Elias sat in the darkness of his quarters, staring at the blank screen where the prefect's image had been. His hands shook slightly as he opened the notebook again, adding another entry to the endless list of indignities. 20 workers to perform like trained animals for the amusement of beings who saw them as barely sentient. He thought of Amy, his younger sister. She'd been selected for a similar cultural demonstration 3 years ago. Even now, he could barely think of her without the familiar not forming in his stomach. Amy had always been the rebellious one, the one who questioned everything, who refused to bow her head even when it meant punishment. The comm unit chirped again. This time, it was a personal message, encrypted and routed through several relay stations. Elias recognized the signature immediately. The gray silence, the resistance network that had been growing in the shadows for the past 5 decades. He'd been in contact with them for years, feeding them information, waiting for the right moment. The message was brief. Exhibition presents opportunity. Stand by for instructions. Elias deleted the message immediately, though he knew the sealer monitoring systems had probably already flagged it. They allowed some level of resistance communication, treating it as another form of entertainment. After all, what could a species as primitive as humanity possibly do against the might of the Dominion? The next morning, Elias assembled his crew in the main gathering hall. The space was carved from the planet's bedrock, its walls still bearing the scorch marks from the plasma cutters used in its construction. 500 humans crowded into the space, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and resignation. The prefect has requested volunteers for a cultural exhibition, Elias announced, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. He watched their faces carefully, noting who flinched, who looked angry, who seemed resigned to yet another humiliation. What kind of exhibition? The question came from Kai, one of the younger workers who'd arrived just 6 months ago. The boy still had fire in his eyes, still believed that dignity was something worth fighting for. The usual, Elias replied, keeping his tone neutral. Traditional dances, customs, entertainment for the Galactic Council. A ripple of bitter laughter passed through the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "Let them choke on our traditions." Others murmured agreement, but Elias raised his hand for silence. "I need 20 volunteers," he continued. "The alternative is selection by lottery." Hands slowly raised throughout the crowd. Some belonged to the older workers, those who'd long ago accepted their fate. Others came from the younger generation, the ones who still harbored dreams of resistance. Elias noted each volunteer, secretly grateful when Amy's name wasn't among them. Then he saw her. Amy stood near the back of the hall, her hand raised high. Her eyes met his across the crowd, defiant and determined. Elias felt his heart sink. He'd managed to keep her off the selection list for 3 years, using his position to shield her from the worst assignments. But this was a direct request from the prefect. He couldn't protect her without raising suspicions. "Thank you all," he managed, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Selected volunteers report to the training center at 0800 tomorrow. As the crowd dispersed, Amy made her way toward him. At 28, she still carried herself with the pride that had gotten her into trouble so many times before. Her mining suit was patched and worn, but she wore it like armor. "You don't have to do this," Elias said quietly when she reached him. "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "Someone needs to show them we're not broken, that we still remember who we are. Amy, please. You know what happened last time, Dash. Last time was different." She cut him off, her eyes flashing. "Last time we weren't ready. This time," she lowered her voice, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "This time we have support." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Amy smiled, the expression both sad and fierce. "You're not the only one who's been talking to the silence, brother. Changes are coming. This exhibition might be exactly what we need. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone in the empty hall. The weight of the notebook in his pocket felt heavier than ever. 50 years of careful documentation, of patient waiting, of enduring one humiliation after another. And now his sister was talking about change, about action. That night, Elias lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his quarters. Through the thin walls, he could hear the constant hum of the life support systems, the distant rumble of mining equipment that never stopped. Somewhere out there, in the vast network of tunnels and chambers that made up the colony, 20 humans were preparing to dance for their oppressors. His comm unit chirped again. Another encrypted message from the gray silence. This time, it contained detailed instructions and a set of coordinates. As he read through the plan, Elias felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The rehearsals began the next day. The sealer had provided authentic costumes based on their xenoanthropologists' research, garish interpretations of human clothing that looked more like caricatures than anything humans had ever actually worn. The volunteers were taught a series of movements that the sealer claimed were based on primitive human mating rituals. Elias watched from the observation deck as Amy and the others went through the routines. To their credit, none of them complained. They moved through the degrading choreography with a kind of grim determination, as if preserving their energy for something more important. Kai had also volunteered, despite being one of the newest arrivals. The young man's anger was barely contained as he performed the ridiculous movements. More than once, Elias caught him exchanging meaningful glances with Amy and some of the others. Whatever the gray silence was planning, it was clear that multiple members were involved. On the third day of rehearsals, Prefect Zoextar arrived for a personal inspection. He brought with him a delegation of other sealer officials, all eager to witness the amusing primitives in action. They sat in comfortable viewing pods, sipping exotic beverages while the humans performed below. Fascinating, one of the officials commented, his translator rendering his words in perfect, condescending English. They almost seemed to understand the movements. Perhaps their cognitive abilities are more developed than we thought. Doubtful, Alistar replied. His third, I focused on the performers. More likely they're operating on instinct. Their neural patterns show remarkable similarity to their evolutionary ancestors. Elias gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain silent. Beside him, his assistant, an older woman named Chun, gripped her datapad so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Like him, she'd learned to hide her anger behind a mask of servitude. Unlike him, she had no idea what was coming. The performance continued, growing more elaborate as the sealer added authentic elements. They brought in props meant to represent primitive human tools, clubs, spears, and other weapons that humans had supposedly used in their savage past. The dancers were instructed to incorporate these into their routines, mimicking combat and hunting behaviors. Then it happened. Amy broke formation during one of the combat sequences. Instead of the choreographed swing, she spun the prop spear in a perfect military drill maneuver. Something she'd learned from Elias years ago when he'd shared stories of his time in the Earth Defense Fleet. The other dancers followed suit, their movements shifting from clumsy pantomime to precise, disciplined formations. The sealer officials laughed, assuming this was part of the show. Zwaxtar clapped his hands in delight. Excellent. They're showing pack hunting behaviors. How wonderfully primitive. But Elias saw the truth in Amy's eyes. This wasn't submission. This was preparation. That night, another message arrived from the gray silence. The exhibition would take place in 2 days, broadcast live across the Galactic Communications Network. Billions of beings would be watching. It would be the perfect stage for what they had planned. Elias spent the next day in a state of controlled anxiety. He went through his normal routines, filing reports, managing shift schedules, all while his mind raced with possibilities. The notebook in his pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. 50 years of evidence, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The morning of the exhibition, Amy came to his quarters. She looked tired but determined, carrying herself with the same dignity she'd always maintained despite everything the sealer had done to humanity. "Whatever happens today," she said, "I want you to know I'm proud to be your sister." Elias pulled her into a tight embrace. "Be careful," he whispered. "Please, just be careful." She smiled as she pulled away. Careful was never really our style, was it? Besides, someone once told me that patience has limits, even for humans. The exhibition venue was a massive amphitheater on Veroni's Prime, capable of holding thousands of spectators from dozens of different species. The humans were transported in a cargo vessel, treated like equipment rather than performers. Elias accompanied them in his role as overseer, his official duties providing cover for what was to come. As they waited in the preparation area, Elias could hear the crowd gathering above. The sound of alien laughter and conversation filtered through the walls, a reminder of how the galaxy viewed humanity. Entertainment, comic relief, a cautionary tale of a species that had reached for the stars too early. The lights dimmed, and a sealer announcer's voice boomed through the amphitheater. "Gentle beings of the Galactic Council, prepare yourselves for a journey into the primitive past. Tonight, witness the savage customs of humanity performed by actual humans from the Veroni's mining colonies." The volunteers were ushered onto the stage, their ridiculous costumes drawing immediate laughter from the audience. Amy stood at the center, her head held high despite the humiliation. As the music began, a synthetic approximation of what the sealer imagined primitive human drums might sound like, the dancers began their routine. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded according to the script. The humans moved through their choreographed steps, wielding their prop weapons in exaggerated combat poses. The audience responded with delight, particularly when Kai pretended to trip over his own spear. Then, at exactly the moment indicated in the Gray Silence's plan, everything changed. Amy stepped forward, breaking formation. Instead of continuing the dance, she began to speak, her voice carried by the same amplification system that broadcast the performance across the galaxy. "For 300 years," she began, her voice clear and strong, "humanity has endured your mockery. We've smiled while you laughed at us. We've danced while you called us primitives. We've died in your mines and factories while you broadcast our suffering as entertainment." The sealer officials scrambled to cut the transmission, but found their control systems unresponsive. Somewhere in the shadows, Gray Silence operatives had taken control of the broadcast networks. Amy continued, her fellow performers forming a protective circle around her. "Today, we show you who we really are. Not the caricatures you've created, not the broken servants you think you've made us. We are the children of Earth, and our patience has finally reached its end." On cue, the other dancers shed their ridiculous costumes, revealing military-style uniforms underneath. Recreations of the Earth Defense Fleet dress blues. They moved into formation with precision that spoke of intensive training, their prop weapons held like the real things. Elias watched from the wings as security forces rushed toward the stage. But they were met by more humans, Gray Silence operatives who had infiltrated the service staff, the technical crews, even the security forces themselves. The sealer had grown so accustomed to human servitude that they'd never considered the possibility of organized resistance. As chaos erupted in the amphitheater, Amy's voice continued to ring out across the galaxy. "We have evidence of your crimes. 50 years of documented atrocities. The systematic genocide of human colonies that refused to comply. The experimentation on human children. The harvesting of human neural tissue for your entertainment devices." Elias felt for the notebook in his pocket, knowing that its contents, and those of hundreds like it, were being transmitted alongside Amy's words. Every humiliation, every death, every violation of the supposed protections the sealer claimed to offer their subject species. The security forces finally reached the stage. Elias watched in horror as they opened fire, their energy weapons cutting through the air. Several of the performers fell, including Kai, who threw himself in front of Amy as she continued to speak. "You called us monkeys," Amy said, blood now staining her uniform where shrapnel had caught her shoulder. "You mocked our evolution, our struggle to reach the stars. But you forgot something important about human nature. A massive explosion rocked the amphitheater as gray silence demolition teams detonated charges throughout the structure. Not enough to bring it down, but enough to shatter the transparency fields that kept the toxic atmosphere of Voronezh Prime at bay. As the poisonous air rushed in, the alien spectators fled in panic, their environmental suits activating automatically. Humans, adapted through generations of exposure to similar toxins, remained standing. Amy's voice, weaker now but still defiant, delivered the final message. We've spent 300 years learning your weaknesses, your technologies, your vulnerabilities. You taught the monkeys to use tools. Now we'll show you what we've learned. The transmission cut off as Amy collapsed. Elias rushed onto the stage, pushing through the chaos to reach his sister. She was still breathing, but barely. Around them, the amphitheater emptied as aliens fled the toxic air. Human resistance fighters moved through the structure, securing positions and preparing for the inevitable counterattack. As Elias cradled Amy's head in his lap, trying to stop the bleeding, he heard the first reports coming in over resistance channels. The broadcast had triggered uprisings across the Dominion. Mining colonies, factory worlds, service stations. Everywhere humans had been placed, they were rising up. The evidence of sealer atrocities had shocked even their allies. Several species were already calling for investigations, threatening to withdraw from the Galactic Council if the allegations proved true. "Did we do it?" Amy whispered, her eyes struggling to focus on his face. "You did it," Elias replied, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You showed them who we really are." Amy smiled weakly. "Not broken," she murmured. "Never broken." The resistance medics reached them then, immediately beginning emergency treatment. As they worked to stabilize Amy, Elias looked around the ruined amphitheater. The ridiculous costumes lay scattered across the stage, abandoned symbols of centuries of humiliation. In their place stood humans in military uniforms, weapons in hand, ready to fight for their freedom. The war that followed would be long and brutal. The Sealer Dominion, shaken by internal dissent and abandoned by several key allies, found themselves facing not just human rebellion, but a fracturing of their entire power structure. The evidence broadcast during the exhibition had revealed the true nature of their rule, turning entertainment into indictment. Elias became one of the military commanders of the resistance, his knowledge of sealer operations and his years of careful documentation proving invaluable. Amy survived her injuries, though she would carry the scars for the rest of her life. She became a symbol of human defiance, her words during the exhibition repeated on every human world as a rallying cry. The fighting raged across star systems, with humanity's newfound allies providing weapons and support. The Sealer, so convinced of their superiority, discovered that humans had spent 3 centuries not just enduring their rule, but studying it. Every weakness, every vulnerability had been cataloged and examined. When the time came to strike, humanity knew exactly where to aim. 3 years into the war, Elias stood on the bridge of a captured Sealer warship, watching as the Resistance fleet prepared for what might be the final battle. The Dominion had been pushed back to their core systems, their subject species either liberated or in open revolt. The entertainment networks that had once broadcast human humiliation now carried stories of human courage and determination. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Sealer High Command. They're requesting terms for surrender." Elias felt a grim satisfaction settle over him. 300 years of patience, of enduring mockery and humiliation, had led to this moment. Humanity had not just survived, they had evolved, adapted, and ultimately triumphed. "Tell them we'll accept their surrender," he said finally. "But make sure they understand, the monkeys are in charge now." As word of the Sealer's surrender spread through human space, celebrations erupted on every world. But Elias felt no joy, only a weary sense of completion. The notebook in his pocket, the same one he carried for 50 years, felt lighter now. Its purpose had been served. Later that night, alone in his quarters, he received a private message from Amy. She was back on Earth, helping to rebuild human society after centuries of oppression. The message was simple. They mocked us for centuries. But we had the last laugh. Elias smiled, thinking of all the humans who had died believing they were nothing more than entertainment for their oppressors. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Humanity had proven that patience, properly applied, could be the most powerful weapon of all. He walked to his viewport, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so far beyond humanity's reach. The sealer had thought they were dealing with primitives, with creatures barely evolved from their animal ancestors. They had forgotten that evolution never stops, that pressure creates adaptation, that 300 years is a long time to perfect the art of revenge. The war was over. The Dominion had fallen. And across the galaxy, species that had once laughed at humanity's expense now spoke their name with respect and not a little fear. The monkeys had not just learned to use tools. They had learned to forge weapons from their chains. As Elias prepared for bed, he pulled out the worn notebook one last time. Its pages, filled with decades of meticulous documentation, had helped bring down an empire. He thought about burning it, letting the past die with the Dominion. But something stopped him. These records were more than just evidence. They were a reminder of what humanity had endured and overcome. He placed the notebook back in his desk drawer. Future generations would need to remember this story. They would need to understand the price of freedom, the power of patience, and the danger of underestimating those you oppress. Outside his window, the stars shone with a different light now. They were no longer the exclusive domain of the superior species. Humanity had claimed their place among them, not through submission but through revolution. The savage monkeys had evolved into something their oppressors had never imagined possible. Free citizens of the galaxy, equals among the stars. The sealer had mocked humanity for centuries, treating them as entertainment, as primitive curiosities barely worthy of contempt. They had broadcast human suffering across the galaxy, turning pain into profit, dignity into comedy. They had thought themselves safe in their superiority, protected by technology and arrogance. They had been wrong. In the end, it wasn't advanced weapons or superior technology that brought down the Dominion. It was something far simpler and more powerful. The human capacity to endure, to learn, and to wait for the perfect moment to strike. 300 years of patience had created the perfect weapon, a species that understood its enemy completely while remaining utterly misunderstood itself. The last laugh, it turned out, belonged to humanity after all. Months passed, and the new galactic order took shape. The Galactic Council was reformed, with humanity now holding a permanent seat. The mining colonies were abandoned, their human populations relocated to worlds where they could build real communities. The entertainment networks that had once broadcast human humiliation now carried educational programs about human history and culture. The real versions, not the caricatures the sealer had created. Elias found himself appointed as humanity's first ambassador to the Reform Council. It was a position he accepted reluctantly, preferring military command to diplomacy. But Amy had convinced him that the fight wasn't over. It had simply moved from battlefields to negotiating tables. His first act as ambassador was to propose a new charter of rights for all sentient species. The document, based on principles humanity had developed over millennia of their own struggles, established protections against the kind of systematic oppression the sealer had practiced. No species would ever again be reduced to entertainment for others. The charter passed unanimously, even earning support from the remnants of the sealer delegation. Their empire broken, their superiority complex shattered, they seemed almost relieved to embrace a new way of thinking. Power based on mockery and humiliation, they had learned, was ultimately unsustainable. During the signing ceremony, Elias thought about all the humans who had died believing they were worthless, who had internalized the mockery and contempt of their oppressors. He thought about the children born into servitude, taught from birth that they were nothing more than primitive animals, lucky to serve their betters. Those children would grow up free now. They would know their real history, understand their true potential. They would look at the stars not as the domain of their oppressors, but as their birthright, their destiny. After the ceremony, Elias received a message that made him smile for the first time in months. It was from the xenoanthropologist who had designed those degrading monkey dances, a formal apology and a request to study authentic human culture. They wanted to understand how they had been so wrong about humanity, how they had missed the intelligence, creativity, and resilience that had ultimately brought down their empire. Elias drafted a polite response, agreeing to cooperate with their studies. But he added one condition. Any research into human culture must be conducted by humans themselves, with alien scholars serving as assistants rather than authorities. The days of others defining humanity were over. That night, in his quarters on the council station, Elias video called Amy on Earth. She was working with a group of young humans, teaching them the real military drill movements that she had revealed during that fateful exhibition. What had once been hidden knowledge was now celebrated tradition. "How's the shoulder?" he asked, noting how she still favored her left arm. "Still hurts when it rains," she replied with a wry smile. "But the doctors say I'll have full mobility back within a year." "How's the political battlefield?" "Different kind of combat," Elias admitted. "But just as important. We're building something here, Amy. Something that will ensure this never happens again. To us or anyone else," Amy added firmly. "That's the key, isn't it? We don't become what they were." Elias nodded, understanding implicit in the gesture. The temptation was there, to use their newfound power to reverse the hierarchy, to make the sealer experience what humanity had endured. But that would make them no better than their former oppressors. "I keep thinking about that night," Amy continued, her voice softer now. "The exhibition, Kai throwing himself in front of me. All those people who died so we could get the message out. They knew what they were signing up for," Elias reminded her. The gray silence was always honest about the costs. "I know, but I still see their faces sometimes. Wonder if it was worth it." Elias looked out his viewport at the bustling space station, where humans now walked as equals among dozens of species. "Ask any human child born free if it was worth it," he said finally. "That's your answer." They talked for a while longer, sharing updates about the reconstruction efforts, the trials of war criminals, the slow but steady progress toward a more just galaxy. When they finally said goodbye, Elias felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades. Later, as he prepared for bed, he pulled out the old notebook one more time. Its pages were yellow now, the ink faded in places. But the words remained clear, a testament to human endurance, a record of survival against impossible odds. He had started keeping these records as a form of resistance, a way to maintain his sanity in the face of systematic dehumanization. He had never imagined they would help topple an empire, that his simple act of documentation would become evidence in the greatest trial in galactic history. Tomorrow, he would attend another council session. There would be debates about reparations, about the redistribution of resources, about the integration of former Dominion territories into the new democratic structure. It would be contentious, complicated, and crucial for the future of the galaxy. But tonight, Elias simply sat with his notebook, remembering the friends who had died in the mines of Blight 6, the families torn apart by sealer entertainment policies, the children who had grown up believing they were nothing more than evolved monkeys, dancing for the amusement of their betters. Those children were free now. That was what mattered. That was what made every sacrifice, every moment of humiliation endured, every year of patient resistance worthwhile. Humanity had been mocked for centuries. They had been called primitives, savages, barely evolved primates, unworthy of respect or dignity. They had been forced to dance, to perform, to debase themselves for the entertainment of others. But in the end, they had proven a fundamental truth about human nature. We are not defined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves. The sealer had seen dancing monkeys. Humanity had seen itself as what it truly was, a species capable of extraordinary patience, remarkable adaptability, and when pushed too far, unstoppable determination. The notebook went back in the drawer, but its work was done. The evidence had been presented, the trial conducted, and justice, imperfect but real, achieved. The galaxy would remember what had happened here, not as a cautionary tale about primitive species reaching beyond their grasp, but as a reminder that freedom, once tasted, can never truly be extinguished. As Elias drifted off to sleep, he thought about Earth, about the blue skies and green fields that humanity had almost lost forever. They were rebuilding now, not just their cities and institutions, but their sense of self, their culture, their pride in being human. The sealer had thought they were creating entertainment. Instead, they had forged a species that would never again bow to anyone's superiority complex. They had mocked humanity for centuries, turning their struggles into comedy, their pain into profit. But humanity had endured. They had watched, learned, and waited. And when their patience finally snapped, when a moment came to show their true nature, they had changed the galaxy forever. The last laugh, as it turned out, was worth waiting for. In the years that followed, Elias would often think back to that moment in the amphitheater when Amy stepped forward and spoke truth to power. He would remember the shock on the sealer faces when they realized the primitives they had mocked were capable of sophistication beyond their imagination. He would recall the dawning horror in their eyes as 300 years of carefully hidden intelligence revealed itself in one coordinated strike. But most of all, he would remember the sound that had followed. Not laughter at humanity's expense, but the silence of a galaxy forced to confront its own prejudices. In that silence, humanity had found its voice. And once found, it would never be silenced again. The monkeys had not just learned to use tools. They had learned to forge dignity from humiliation, strength from oppression, and hope from despair. They had taken the mockery meant to break them and transformed it into the foundation of their liberation. And across the stars, in the councils and academies and halls of power, beings who had once laughed at humanity now spoke their name with respect, not because humans had become like them, but because they had remained true to themselves, patient, resilient, and ultimately unbreakable. The sealer dominion had fallen. The age of human servitude had ended, and in its place rose something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had conquered not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple refusal to accept the role others had assigned them. They had been mocked for centuries, but in the end, humanity had proven that the greatest revolution sometimes begins with nothing more than the quiet resolve to stop dancing to someone else's tune. And when that resolve finally crystallized into action, when patience transformed into purpose, the very foundations of the galaxy had shifted. The entertainment was over. The performance had ended. And humanity, at long last, had taken its rightful place among the stars, not as primitives or savages, but as equals. The monkeys had evolved indeed, but not in the way their tormentors had imagined. They had evolved into something far more dangerous than any predator, a species that understood both oppression and freedom and would never allow the former to exist again. The story of humanity's rise would be told for generations, across countless worlds. But for those who had lived through it, who had endured the centuries of mockery and emerged victorious, the lesson was simpler. Patience has its limits, even for humans. And when those limits are reached, the universe itself must make room for change. The last laugh belonged to humanity, and it echoed across the stars, not with mockery or cruelty, but with the pure joy of a species finally free to be itself. The dancing was over. The performance had ended, and in its place stood something far more powerful than any empire, a people who had found their voice and would never be silenced again. In the end, the sealer had been right about one thing. Humans were indeed remarkable survivors. They simply hadn't understood that survival sometimes means more than just enduring. Sometimes it means waiting for the perfect moment to remind the universe that evolution never stops, that underdogs can become champions, and that those who mock others should be very careful about teaching their victims to use tools. The revolution had been 300 years in the making. But when it came, it changed everything. And across the galaxy, Beings who had once seen humanity as entertainment now understood a fundamental truth. The patience of the oppressed is not weakness, but strength, gathering like a storm until the moment it breaks. And when it breaks, it reshapes worlds. Humanity had been patient. They had endured mockery, survived humiliation, and maintained their dignity in the face of systematic dehumanization. They had waited, watched, and learned. And when their patience finally snapped, they had shown the galaxy who they really were. Not the primitive caricatures of sealer propaganda, but a species of extraordinary resilience, remarkable intelligence, and ultimate triumph. The monkeys had stopped dancing. The performance was over. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy heard something it had never expected. The sound of chains breaking, of freedom rising, of a species reclaiming its destiny among the stars. The last laugh was humanity's, and it would echo through history as a reminder that no amount of mockery can extinguish the human spirit. They had mocked humans for centuries, until our patience finally snapped. And when it did, we changed the galaxy forever.